We are looking at the series of Resident Evil,
What is
and I am
this?
going to rank
Wow,
here my
what
favorite
a
games in the
mansion!
mainline series as we prepare here for the release of Resident Evil Requiem, which at the time of this recording
Captain
will
Wesker,
be
where's
later,
Chris?
it should be available later on tonight. I'm in Pacific
Stop
time
it!
zone, so it should be
Don't
available by
open
9
that
p.m.
door!
Otherwise,
But
tomorrow on the
Chris is...
27th. And so we're starting off here just having a
What
quick
is
look
it?
at the original Resident Evil, the
Maybe
one that
it's
started it all.
Chris.
And
Hey,
ultimately, this is
Jim,
definitely one of my
Can
favorite
you
gaming
go?
series of
I'm
all
going
time.
with you.
It's
Chris is our old
not
partner,
all
you
the games
know.
have been a hit in this series
Okay,
here,
let
but there's
me
definitely
handle
been a lot of
this.
good ones. And it just sort of thrives off of being able to reinvent itself. And
Stay alert.
I mean, ultimately, it's just most of the Resident Evil games have a bit of a campy horror to it, which is actually part of the appeal of the game. But as the series has gone on, it's definitely been able to find new ways to scare the audience. As you know, originally it started off with these pre-rendered backdrops, and then eventually went
A
to more
dining room.
first-person 3D, when more realistic. But either way, Resident Evil has always been a staple in the video game industry, I feel, since this one first came out in 1996. And so wanted to take a little bit of a look back at this series here, and again, ranking the games in the main series. So what I'll be
What?
doing is
What is this?
I'll also there'll be two kind of side, I
What
guess you
is
can consider
it?
them like side games
Blood.
also in the series, but they are for me canon
Jill,
though as far as the overall
see if you can
storyline
find
goes.
any other
And
clues.
so
I'll
that
be
way it
examining
kind of makes it
this.
to a nice even 10 number.
Hope this is not
But
Chris's
yeah, let
blood.
me know otherwise what your favorite games are. But here are my top 10 favorite games in this series. And we are starting off here with Resident Evil 6 at my 10 spot here. And I know this game is sort of the one that gets usually lumped into being the worst game in the series. And for me also as well, I mean, I do gotta say that this is probably my least favorite in the mainline series, but it doesn't mean that I hate it though. And as a matter of fact, I actually kind of like it. It's so there was a few things that was going on here with the series at this time when it came out, which I think it was like either 2012ish or so when it came out. But basically, the series had already been started moving towards more to being more action oriented. You can see here, right? I mean, there's already some crazy action going on. But Resident Evil 4, while an amazing game, it was a lot more action oriented than previous Resident Evil games, and then Resident Evil 5 even more so. But both of them still had a sense of like survival horror to them to an extent. But this one really just went all out action, and in a way, this was sort of felt like an end game for Resident Evil, where
Come on.
you get a lot of
It's not
crazy
over yet.
action. The plot seems like it's wrapping up for what was going on at the time with everything going on with Umbrella and all. And then you get all these characters
Hang
that
in
have
there,
been in a
Elena.
lot of the Resident Evil games. And so it sort of felt like an end all to the series. And they definitely went all out in action, but that's sort of where it lost a lot of the audience
I'll
and
only
why
slow
a
you
lot of
down.
people tend to not
Just
favor this
go.
game too well, is because Resident Evil works better when it's more based
You're
on
not getting off that
horror as
easy.
opposed to like more
Come on.
action. Because this game definitely felt more like it was appealing to, the Call of Duty crowd that was, those games that were really in at that time. But having said that, though, right, if you can look at this game for being just that as just an action game,
After all
it's
we've been
actually
through,
pretty good in my
it'd be a
opinion.
waste to give up
And
now.
it's definitely, I mean, it's fun. It controls well. It has some pretty cool set pieces, and the graphics are not too bad, especially on this remastered version, right, that came out on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And so for that, there, I mean, I would definitely say it's worth playing. It's like I said, it does have some issues with it. Has these quick time events and all that kind of get a little annoying. But ultimately, it's definitely, like I said, right, not a bad game. I mean, it controls pretty well. The target shooting on it and all, it's pretty well done. And not a bad game overall, but it definitely felt though at times though, because that one complaint that I do have about it is that it kind of felt like it kept dragging on and on and on. And even though, like I said, some of the action gets a little intense, it still felt at times a little boring though too, if you can imagine. And I think that's another reason why this game gets a little bit of hate is that it feels a little bit too bloated.
Let's try this
But
way.
it definitely has a lot of content though
Almost
to
through
it.
this.
So I would definitely say if you're a fan of the series and you know you've heard a lot of negative things about this one here, I would still suggest giving it a go. Again, it's not the best in the series, I think, for a lot of people, but I don't think it's necessarily bad though. And you might come away liking it, right? Again, if you can just appreciate it, that it's just trying to be an action game mainly, with some horror elements to it. Next up here is Resident Evil Zero. A little bit of history on this game. So this was originally going to be a Nintendo 64 exclusive, but they ended up bumping it up to the Nintendo GameCube. And so really improved on the graphics on it and taking more or less the same engine that was in the Resident Evil remake. And this one here, though, it's an original adventure that's a prequel to the first Resident Evil game. And in this one here, you control Rebecca Chambers, who, if you're familiar with the first Resident Evil game, she makes an appearance in the original Resident Evil if you played through Chris's campaign. So this is sort of the events of what happened leading up to that game there. And, well, I mean, it plays pretty good. It has, like, the tank controls, the pre-rendered backdrops with polygonal characters, only much improved from the PlayStation version as far as graphics goes. But the game, for me, just kind of suffered a bit on what a lot of the games did during this stretch here, where they felt like they needed to do a prequel to a lot of gaming franchises out there, and some of them, well, it's kind of cool to see more of the overall story of what's going on, and especially if it's a favorite franchise of yours. I don't feel like it always is necessary though, and that's kind of where this one fell into it for me. As I mean, the story's cool, I guess, what you're doing in it, but I don't know. At times, it just kind of felt like all of this happened before the events of the Spencer Mansion, and so for that reason there, it kind of throws me off a bit. But it's not that you won't have any fun, and it does do some pretty cool things though too, where for example it gets rid of the item boxes, and you can drop your items off wherever, which that's kind of a double-edged sword, where I kind of appreciated that you can, like if you needed an item and your inventory's full, you can just drop an item right in to pick it up. But that also means that if it's something that you did want to come back to that item later, you have to remember where you dropped it off. So it's kind of, so again, it's kind of like I don't necessarily like it or hate it more than just the regular item boxes. But one of the cool thing though is that you can control these two characters here eventually. So that's Rebecca Chambers and this is Billy Cohen, I believe. And so the way that you can switch between the two different characters and use their skill set, it does make for some creative puzzles in some areas, but nothing that I feel is too highly original. But even then, though, if you're, again, into Resident Evil and you want to see the overall story of how it plays out, I would say it's worth playing. It's definitely not a bad game, just in certain ways it becomes a little bit unnecessary.
Edward, are you all right?
Next up here on my list for number 8 is Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. And so for this one here, I'm going with the original PlayStation version. As this one here, well, the remake was pretty cool for what it is, and I mean, definitely looks nicer, and it's not a bad game by no means, but I just felt that the cut content that they did on that one really hurt it, and so that's why a big part of the reason why I still prefer this one here. But this one is still, from the PlayStation 1 era, so you get your pre-rendered backdrops with polygonal characters, and they definitely improved on the detail though on the overall backdrops, which was pretty impressive what they were able to do on the PlayStation back in those days. And the polygonal characters and all look pretty impressive as well too. But this one here, so you control Jill Valentine, and so this game was a bit of it felt certainly like a side game, as my understanding was that Sony, so this game was made to be sort of like a side game to the Resident Evil series, because basically the setting in the timeline of the game, it takes place roughly around the same time that the Resident Evil 2 takes place in, only you're seeing it from Jill's perspective. But I think what happened though was that Sony had an exclusivity to have the mainline numbered games in the series on their system, at least for a period of time. And so because of that, this game ended up becoming Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, where what I felt was the actual third game in the series, as far as the overall story goes, was Resident Evil Code Veronica, which that came out on the Dreamcast, but I'll get into that one later. But basically, because of that, right, I don't know why this one was still considered like Part 3, though. At least that's my understanding of it. But even though, for it being a game that was just supposed to be sort of like a side game, it's actually still pretty impressive and roughly about the same length as the other ones. Only now, this is more focused on Jill's story, though, as opposed to having like two different campaigns. But there is still a section, though, where you do control another character, Nick Carlos, and so even though you can't play a full campaign with him, he still plays a role in this game here, though, right? Where you can control that another character. As Resident Evil games, for the most part, I believe, in most cases, at least in most cases, not all, but it allows you to control another character, right? So this one still didn't completely skimp out on that. But it's more action oriented, and so you get more variety of weapons here, like everything from an assault rifle, and then you can collect like gunpowders like here, and then you can mix them, right, to create more bullets. So it kind of took a little bit of that survival horror element out of it. As I don't know, it just felt like a lot of times bullets were in abundance, but it still has its somewhat scary moments. And the big catch of this game was Nemesis. We just kind of breaks through, right, and just starts chasing you just at random. That was always kind of frightening, and I felt that that's another aspect too. Also, that I felt that this one did better, as in the Resident Evil remake, it seems like his appearance was more scripted, where this one felt a bit more unpredictable. And so he's definitely a terrifying factor in this game here, and kind of the main lure of this game. But overall, on its own, it's definitely still worth a playthrough. And even though it's probably my least favorite from the PlayStation era, it's still a worthwhile experience. And yeah, I definitely advise to check it out. And next up here at number 7, I have Code Veronica. So this game here was originally exclusive to the Sega Dreamcast, and like I said earlier in the Resident Evil 3 that I was just talking about, this one feels like it was actually more Part 3, right, than that one there, as this one definitely feels more expanded on. It continues on the storyline that the Resident Evil universe was going in, as now you control Claire Redfield, and she's in Europe trying to find her brother Chris. And the game is pretty long for a Resident Evil game back then.
Go on.
And just definitely felt like the series was going in a different direction, right? Where originally the first one was in a mansion, the second one in Requiem City, but now it's going international now. And so I thought that was pretty cool overall.
What are you saying?
But at the time, the facial animations and the character models were pretty impressive. It was definitely a jump up from what the original Resident Evil games were doing. But
and what about you? What are you going to do?
It still has the fixed camera angles, even though everything is in 3D now. So I felt that it kind of got the best of both worlds, where again the fixed camera angles and the tank controls, I just feel like it lends something to increasing the tension factor, right, in the gameplay, just because the controls are a little clunky, right, and all it seems like it's kind of hard to control the character and all, which for me just kind of amplifies the tension on it. But overall, pretty cool game though here, and at the time anyways, it was kind of a killer app for the Sega Dreamcast, as at the time, the Sega Saturn was kind of hurting for some really cool third-party games, and so seeing something like this on the Dreamcast was pretty cool. And while I do like the game, and every time I play this game, it's pretty fun. I have a fun time with it and all, but there's just a few things that just kind of annoy me a little bit about it. One of them, is that sometimes when you open up a door or go up the stairway, for some reason it tries to do like this really dramatic effect of like going slowly, and you hear like this loud heartbeat, which I get it, they're trying to make it for it to seem more tense, but I don't know, it's just kind of annoying. And the other things too also is that the direction of the game, even though obviously you still get zombies, it's still kind of scary. ultimately it seemed like it was trying to go more action oriented. I mean, just the intro alone, it looks like it was something directed from John Woo or so, which I don't know. It just seems a little out of place for a Resident Evil game. And some other things too also is that there's two characters in this that for me are just kind of highly annoying, and that's with what's his name, Alfred, and then also with Steve. And they can just be kind of grating, mainly to do with the acting, at least the direction of the voice acting in it. It can be a little annoying, but still though, it's even with all these nitpicks that I have with this game, every time I do play it, I still have a fun time with it. I think that's kind of shows that the horror gameplay of Resident Evil was done really well too. So yes, it kind of diminishes some of the horror. But again, not to say that it's not has some somewhat scary moments like this right here, right? I mean, I guess you can say scary, right? You get all these zombies here, and it was kind of cool to see the improved graphics where you can see like the rotting flesh on it a lot more clearly now. So definitely not a bad game by no means. Just has some little issues here and there that sort of took it down a notch a bit, but definitely still worth your time. And next up here we have Resident Evil 5.
We're a team. Whatever happens, we stick together.
This one here introduces Chris Redfield, or I should say it shouldn't introduce, but you're controlling Chris Redfield once again, but it does introduce a new character, Sheva, here, as you are in Africa now, where there's, Umbrella is up to their usual experimentations, and also definitely affects this area here. And so I stated earlier, right, that Resident Evil eventually started going more action-oriented, and this is where you really started feeling that even more so, as Resident Evil 4 sort of laid the groundwork for it, but this one definitely went more action. Not quite as Part 6, but it definitely, felt more like, I would call this more of a 3D shooter than a survival horror, basically. But it's not to say that it's not fun, though. And otherwise, I mean, it actually improves on some of the control mechanics that Resident Evil 4 was doing. So overall, it feels like a slightly better playing game, but ultimately, I mean, the game is well paced. It's pretty fun overall, and one of the things that it really tried to introduce was co-op play, where one player controls Chris and the other one Sheva. And if I recall, I believe you can do that like co-op local co-op, or also online. I don't quite recall really. I never really played the game that way, but that's one thing that they try to introduce in this game here, and I don't know, I felt like that was sort of a bit of a hit or miss as far as like if it was worthwhile, right, to do that. But either way, though, this is still a really great game. It's really fun. Like I actually really enjoyed this game. I think it's pretty fun, and it looks really incredible too. Definitely one of the better looking games from this generation, as this game came out on the PlayStation 3 and on the Xbox 360 as well. And yeah, overall a pretty fun game, but I felt like I'll probably say this a few times here as I'm going through these games, is that some of these Resident Evil games start off really cool, like I like the premise of it and everything, but then eventually just kind of can't help itself but go into this really crazy sort of extreme action and storyline and all, which I know that's part of the whole fun of Resident Evil games, but something I wish a Resident Evil game would just kind of stick to its more grounded horror roots and all. Like this part right here and all, I mean, for what it is, it's kind of, it's a little frightening, right? And so I think this is just where a lot of these Resident Evil games excel more. But you do get some new moves here to help out with your aiming. Like it has a few new melee attacks that you can do, like if you want to hit the enemy in the right spot. Let's see if I can land here. So for example, like Chris can now punch them and all. But otherwise, the 3D aiming that was there from the previous one is still there, and you can switch between your items, between characters. And so Sheva, for the most part, her AI, it's not the best, but sometimes she comes through though and heals you at the right moment. Although sometimes she can use up the items a little too fast sometimes. But either way though, like I said, I mean, it's a very fun game. I do really enjoy it. And definitely I would say worth your time. Just kind of know that this is where the series started to go in a little bit more action oriented, for better or worse.
We should keep moving. They'll find us soon.
And at number 5 here, I have Resident Evil Village. And so this game here was quite the departure for this series here to an extent, as we're dealing more with like what seems like classical monsters now. Like things like lichens and vampires and such, which I thought was I actually really enjoyed that, because again, one thing that I really like about the Resident Evil series is just how much it's able to differentiate itself, right, and keep reinventing itself, and so it keeps the horror fresh, as you know, as opposed to just sticking to just zombies. And I really enjoyed this aspect about this series overall here. And so this one takes the first person perspective that Resident Evil 7 was doing. But again, now you're still controlling Ethan Winters. Winters, I believe that's his last name. And only this time you are in Europe, and you're basically trying to track down. Well, I'll just keep the story a little vague, right? But let's just say you're just trying to figure out what happened to your family. I guess I'll leave it at that. But yeah, overall though, it's a pretty cool game. I mean, the gameplay is again very similar to Resident Evil 7. Again, you're in this first-person perspective here, but it's it feels that certain areas are right along, like it really amps up the action a little bit more. And oh, I'm a little lost here, but overall though, it still definitely can be scary though, as some of the graphics can be, I mean, the graphics are really detailed, as you can see here, right, and all, and they could definitely be a bit grotesque, which is kind of nice. Where one thing that I feel Resident Evil 7 really brought to this series was kind of that sort of like grindhouse horror sort of element to it, and which I really like. And yeah, just I mean, I love the variety in this game as far as like the locations you visit. So you're starting off in the snowy village, and then eventually you go into this sort of like a Gothic Victorian castle, being chased by an vampirist lady, and so all of that, I just feel like it's really original and cool. But yeah, I guess if I have any knocks on the series, again, it's just that it went a little too action-oriented, and at the same time as well, I don't know, something about the, again, Ethan Winters, that he doesn't have much of a personality, and I kind of get the feeling like they sort of made him like that on purpose. Sort of like, almost like being like a silent protagonist, right? And all, like his personality is pretty bland to the point where it almost feels like, you're just sort of inserting yourself in the game. But for what it is though, right, it's still pretty cool. And like I said, moments like these, can definitely feel tense, which kind of reminisce back to the Resident Evil 4 days, right? When you're barricading yourself in a house and trying to avoid the enemies. But yeah, great game still, and definitely worth playing. Now, like I said, don't get me wrong, even if I sound a little negative at points, I still strongly feel that this is a game worth playing, and you have a lot of fun with it. And coming in at my 4th favorite Resident Evil game, this is for Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. So this is the game that followed Resident Evil 6, which I have at my lowest spot here. And so they really went back into their survival horror roots with this one, and for the better too, as this was sort of a reinvention of the series again, and brought it back to, again, what made the series successful in the first place was, being more scary than action. And it's definitely gruesome, like, that's this right here. Oh my god, that's pretty brutal. But this is the first game that they started using their now famous RE engine, which gives the games, they can be really detailed, but at the same time running at 60 frames per second. So it's definitely a showpiece, right, for what can be done on the console, or even on PC, on PC also at the time, and definitely looks impressive to this day. The graphics can get really gory in this one, and I love it, because one thing I've said before, right, and I feel like Resident Evil works best when it's more scary as opposed to action-oriented, and this one definitely, I would say, is probably the scariest one that I've played as of right now. So you're going through this mansion, so it kind of goes back to like what they did with the first Resident Evil game, only now you have this Baker family that is chasing you, and they are pretty intimidating. As you can see here, I'm fighting this guy here. And it's cool because all of the different family members have like different scenarios that you play through with them to try to take them out one way or the other. And yeah, just still have some pretty cool like set piece moments and all like this right here. Oh, I need the key. I don't have the key. Ah! But yeah, I'm so glad that they went back in this direction here. Supposedly I had seen something that the creator or some Capcom executive or something like that said like, hey, you know, people didn't really like Resident Evil 6, let's go back to our horror roots. And sure enough, that's what happened with this one here. And because it's in first person perspective now, it really puts the intensity of the game right up in your face. And I feel like that made for some really cool moments here. Like this right here, I thought was just pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely one of the more impressive comebacks of the series that we've seen before in the past. As, you know, like I said, the reception to Resident Evil wasn't the best at this time. And so it's just kind of glad that they decided to go back to what worked. And because after this game here, we've had a lot of great Resident Evil games ever since then. But yeah, definitely check this game out. Just, you know, be sure to be prepared, right, to be scared a time or two on this.
There are only 3 STARS members left now. Captain Wesker, Jill, and myself. We don't know where Barry is.
And at my number 3rd spot is we go back to the original Resident Evil. Well, kinda. You see, the original Resident Evil came out in 1996 on the PlayStation, where this was a remake done of that game, which came out in 2002, originally on the GameCube. And this game right here is probably one of the best examples of how a remake should be treated, where it takes the foundation of the first game, which was good, but it really amplifies it pretty much all across the board. I mean, you got better visuals, better gameplay, the extra horsepower and all, and the art direction as well too make this game a lot creepier than the first one could. And not to take anything from the first one, I still think that's a fine game worth, you know, checking out for sure. But this is definitely one where I can say that the remake really improved the overall experience. And Capcom should really be commended for what they did in this one here. As, again, it just amplified everything else, and the mansion just looks a lot creepier here. And definitely set the setting much better than, you know, what the first one couldn't do, just mainly, again, because of the limitation of the hardware and all. The overall concept too, right, of just being in a mansion where you're surrounded by zombies is a really scary, you know, scenario to be put in, right? And while I really like the other Resident Evil games, obviously, and, you know, they kind of expand out more, right, and all too, where you're not just stuck in a mansion, I kind of like this part of it, though, also, too, where sometimes I feel like games where it just puts you mainly in one location, that makes things feel a little bit more claustrophobic and all, which definitely helps out with, you know, making it a more scary experience. But I mean, now the version I'm playing here is the one that was done like on the PlayStation 4, but the original one though, still, right, the pre-rendered backdrops look incredible, and they have a lot of detail to them and all, and so that also let, you know, for at times where the game can almost be like photorealistic looking. And the character models, I mean, they've definitely better from what they were doing on the PlayStation. It looks really good still. I mean, this is still a very nice looking game in my eyes, and I'm glad that they kept this style here, right, where it had the pre-render backdrops, the, you know, polygonal characters, because one thing that this can do really well is for making these really dramatic cinematic shots like this right here, right, with the candle in the foreground. And I just feel like that lets the directors and all frame a really cool shot and gives it a bit of tension to the game, right, where you can't quite see what's in front of you and all, but sometimes you can hear what's in front of you, and so that definitely gave a certain mood to the game and all. But yeah, I mean, this game here, for being the OG here, well, at least, you know, the game Resident Evil itself, still one of the better ones in my opinion. And like I said, I wouldn't still slack off on the original PlayStation version. I still feel like that's a really great version, but this one here is definitely one where I felt that they improved on a lot of it as well. So Resident Evil, though, the first one, however you choose to play it, whether again being the first PlayStation one or this one, absolutely worth your time to see where the series started, and also just, you know, for a really fun and great survival horror experience. And at my number 2, I have Resident Evil 4. For this game here, while my previous one that I just did for Resident Evil 1, while I really still like the original PlayStation version, I definitely like more the remake version.
Excuse me.
For Resident Evil 4, though, because this is so a lot of Resident Evil games have had like remakes or remasters of some sort, and Resident Evil 4 is one of those where this is the original game here that, well, this is like a remastered version of it and all, but based off of the GameCube one that came out back in 2005 is what it's based on. And this version here is definitely one of my all-time favorite games. But the remake that they came out of, about 3 years ago now, is really excellent as well, too. So I haven't quite decided which one I like more. So I'm just going to lump both of them together in this spot here at number 2, as I feel that, well, I mean, they're both, you know, more or less the same game as far as the setting and all, and the story and all, but obviously the graphics are different on them, but they still have a sort of, I don't know, they both feel, they have like their own charm to them, I guess, or not charm, or, I'm sorry, I should say, this one has a certain charm to it still, right, and all that. I definitely don't want to exclude it from this list, even though the new version exists out there, but the new one is also really great as well. But what this one here did, though, is that it definitely started reinventing the series, as now, instead of being the, you know, with the pre-rendered backdrops and fixed camera angles and all, now it's a third-person shooter with over-the-shoulder camera. And while there has been some attempts to do this, you know, prior to this game, this is one that really sort of, like, popularized this style of a shooting game. And I mean, this game was highly influential for that. Now, because of that, we did lose some of the, I guess, the survival horror aspects of it. But it's still a pretty intense game, though, and it's definitely like with all the enemies, you know, and the ganados right up in your face, it can still be intimidating. So I felt that it was able to still have that good balance, right, of being horror and then also action, and I think that's one thing that this game got really right with, you know, its balance on that. And, you know, for the time, I mean, it definitely has some pretty incredible graphics, and eventually, like I said, this game was a GameCube exclusive, but the game was just a little bit too good, though, right, for Capcom to just keep it on that system there, as again, eventually this game got ported over to pretty much everything. I mean, there's, you know, this version here that I'm playing on the PlayStation 4, and then there's also a cool way you can play this game in VR, and there was also a version on the Wii that was actually pretty good. So, I mean, however you choose to play this version here, it's still really excellent, and definitely worth it, you know, to look at. And, I mean, it was definitely, it's definitely been one of the coolest, like, reinventions of the series out there that I've ever seen. I mean, as much as I like the original Resident Evil games and all, I can't deny that what they did with this one was really cool too also. And, you know, being able to, the target aiming on this and all is really well done, and definitely makes you feel like you're, you know, quite the badass out here, right, and all taking out these ganados. And that's the other thing too also, right there, we're starting to steer a little bit away from zombies, and now into different kind of monstrosities out there, right, and all that Umbrella has been up to, or, you know, perhaps other deranged individuals, I'll say. The funny thing about this one too also is that it definitely can be cheesy at times, but kind of in a good way, where, you know, Leon, him and his funny quips and all, is kind of funny to listen to, but you can kind of enjoy his sort of like cocky sort of attitude. And that's the one thing that I do prefer about this one and all, is that I feel it lends into its campiness a little bit better than the remake. And yeah, so I mean, you know, like I said, as much as I like the remake, I still feel that this one has its place, and I couldn't I couldn't not just replace this one, right? Even though the remake exists out there. And so speaking of that remake, this is really an incredible new vision of this game, though. I mean, the first thing is obvious, right? And all just how much improved the graphics are. And although I do kind of like the original one's campiness and all, the improved graphics, which allows for more grotesque detail and all, definitely makes this one scarier, though, as it kind of has the look of like Resident Evil Village and 8 also, which those games had, that really kind of, again, that sort of like grindhouse horror sort of look to it. And so when you take the Resident Evil 4 game that came before this one, before it, and then you use that sort of graphical style, it's definitely gives a new intimidation factor to this one here, as now things feel a bit frightening more so, right, than the other one. And so I dig it. I mean, like I said, I don't quite know if I like this one or the original one more, but it's just two different flavors of the same thing, and I can't really complain with that. I mean, what I do like is that Capcom has definitely been treating their remakes with a lot of care, right, and all, knowing that the originals are, really well beloved, and they really wanted to do these new updated versions justice. Which, I mean, well, there's a whole other conversation as far as how they've been treating some of their legacy games, Resident Evil, right, and all, but regardless, so I mean, these remakes are definitely, well, I don't necessarily, again, feel like they replace the originals, but they're still pretty cool overall. Now, this scene here, I mean, this is always still one of my favorite openings in a video game of all time, whether if it's this one or the original one. And again, with just the more intense graphics on this one, I mean, it definitely feels a lot more tense, a lot more scary. I mean, the detail on the gore and all looks really, really messed up, but in a good way. Now, Leon in this one, his acting is not bad. It's just that he feels a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more generic of a character. But he's still a pretty cool character, though, right? And I mean, for the most part, the layout of the game is, it kind of sticks to mostly the same areas and all. There's a few little things that are rearranged and all, in a few new areas where I think it might. I don't quite recall if it took out an area or two or not. But yeah, definitely a cool game though, and yeah, I just love the overall gore in this one. It's definitely cool. Oh. Yikes! Sorry, Leon. But yeah, either way though, Resident Evil 4, whether you're playing the old version or this one, this is an excellent, an excellent entry to this long-standing series. But coming in at my favorite Resident Evil game is Resident Evil 2. And kind of like Resident Evil 4 though, this one here, I can't quite decide if I like more the original one or the remake, so I'm just lumping them both together in this spot here. So this one here, it starts expanding out more from just, being in one location, like the first one in Spencer Mansion, where you're now in the city and everything's been overrun now by zombies. So it's expanding on the overall Resident Evil universe, but not quite at the point where things got, a little bit too crazy, right? And I still really enjoyed, right, and all that. It's still within Raccoon City where the zombie infection has spread, and so now all the citizens here and all are just trying to find ways to survive and all. And so you get to play Leon Kennedy here in his first appearance in the series. And I just like this overall story where, he's a rookie cop coming into Raccoon City and just everything's gone to shit.
The entire city was infested with zombies.
For the time when it came out in 1998, it's just improved a lot on the first one, where, I mean, it's more or less the same. Pre-rendered backdrops, polygonal characters, and the controls are mostly the same and all, but just the overall setting, the story, and all, it just felt a little bit just more expanded on. And I feel like this is definitely one of the best sequels that have ever come out. They really nailed it with this one here. And something about this style here, again with these tank controls and all, that it just lends itself really well to the survival horror formula. And for that there, I still really enjoyed this game. Even with all the new games that have come out and all, this one still, I feel, is very fun and definitely is a good example of just how good classic Resident Evil survival horror games can be. You get a few new extra weapons on this, and the cool thing about this one too also is that it really expands the replayability of it, as kind of like in Resident Evil 1, you control two different characters and they all have their own campaigns, and they have unique enough story elements to them that it's worth playing both of them. Where this one you control Leon Kennedy and then Claire Redfield. But the cool thing about it though is that when you beat one person's campaign, you unlock the other person's second campaign. And that just sort of increases the overall length of the game, right? And all, where the second campaigns, they have enough different elements to them that it's definitely makes them worth playing. So for example, if I beat Leon's campaign, then that unlocks a second campaign for Claire and vice versa. And so the original version came on 2 discs, where each disc was for, one of the other's campaign on it. Yeah, but this game, for me personally, this game still holds up incredibly well. I just love the setting to it. Where again, it hasn't quite got all extreme action, but it has a bit more, I guess, action to it than the original one. But at the same time, right, and all, it's still pretty freaky, though. Just again, thinking about a city overrun with zombies and all, I mean, that's pretty frightening. And so I felt that this one still was a nice middle ground, right, between not being too over the top, but not being just, secluded to just one area, right, and all, where it's able to kind of stretch its legs out a little bit to explore the overall Resident Evil universe more. But just like the remake of Resident Evil 4, this remake really expanded on more on what the original one was doing. And while I still, like I said, right, I mean, I like this one and the original PlayStation 1 pretty much equally. This one is still really intense, though. And, I mean, as you can see here, right, and all, I mean, it's definitely not shying away from the goriness factor. And, yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed this remake here. And, I mean, it was just so cool to see, because this is the first remake that they did with the RE engine. So it was definitely cool to see these characters and the story and everything expanded on, right, more with this, really cool graphics engine and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, it definitely made the game more frightening. And so, and for that reason there, right, and all, it's still why it's one of my favorite Resident Evil games. But again, I thought that the PlayStation one was still kind of frightening, but this one, really impressed me more, right, as you can see here, right? I mean, everything just looks a lot more scary, gory, take the sort of like really visceral gore factor and scariness of it of what Resident Evil 7 was doing, only with the Resident Evil 2 setting. And I thought that was just like a match made in heaven. I really dug this remake here.
Jesus, they're everywhere.
And especially because you're in this police station that's all run down and all, just like the usage of where you only have your flashlight in in several parts of the game to help you see, definitely made the game feel more claustrophobic and tense. And yeah, I mean, I really dug this game. And just like the Resident Evil on the PlayStation, this one is kind of the same, where again you can control the two characters, Claire Redfield or Leon Kennedy, and each one has, if you beat one with the, you unlock the other person's campaign. So it still retained all that, and so I thought that was really cool. And what I liked about this one as well too, unlike Resident Evil 3, is that this one was still able to retain most of the content from the Resident Evil 2. And so I thought that was pretty cool, where they, you didn't feel like you were
I'm sure you
getting
did what you could, Leon.
scammed away right and off from some content on this game here.
Does anyone know what started this?
So definitely one of the best remakes of all time. And
Honestly, all
this
you
one
need
in
to know
part
is that this
two,
place won't
well, I
let
mean,
you
sorry, the one
alive
on the
anymore.
PlayStation, I still
Yeah, well,
hold
I was
as
supposed
my
to start
favorite
last
Resident
week
Evil
and I got
games
a
of
call
all
to stay
time.
away.
And
I wish I'd come here sooner.
yeah, just a lot of fun to play
You're
through.
here now, Leon.
But either way, though, I mean, this series has had a lot of great games, and all the games that I have listed on this list
Hey,
here,
Lieutenant.
I feel like they're all really
Ready?
good. Even with Resident Evil 6, like I said, right, and I still
On the
think
way
the
out
whole
of this
series is
station.
worth playing.
Then
There's
all
some
this
other
will
games
get
too,
better
also that I
and
haven't
better.
really messed around with, like for example, Resident Evil
We thought this
Revelations 1
secret
and 2.
passageway
I
might
heard
be
those are
perfect.
pretty decent as well. Just haven't got a chance to play around with them, but
This is good
this
news.
is how I have the main
We can get you to
series
a
listed
hospital.
anyways.
No,
Let me know
no, I
what
am
your
not the
favorite
priority here.
games are in
Lieutenant,
this
I'm not just
series,
gonna leave
and
you
I'll
here.
see you in the
I'm
next
giving
one.
you an
And
order,
hopefully
Bucky.
we'll get to enjoy
You
Resident Evil
save
Requiem
yourself
here
first.
soon.
I'd come with you, but I'd just slow you down. Now, you'll need this.
I can't take him.
Stop. And don't make my mistake. If you see one of those things, uniform or not, you do not hesitate. You take it out, or you run. Got it?
Yes, sir.